paar secondjes. Ik weet nooit eigenlijk wanneer dit... Okay, now I see the sign, it started, but I never really know how many seconds I need to wait. So, yes. Hi guys, third time that we meet for this new series of language learning methodology. So I am here with a third speaker, Timothy, and so he has yet another kind of methods of his own. And so we are all, I guess, eager to hear from it. So first, I'd like to thank you for coming. And I'd like to ask you to kind of introduce yourself in a nutshell. So say a bit who you are and any information you would like to share with the audience who don't know you yet, or at least from my channel.
Well, thank you very much, Guillaume, and thank you for inviting me, and my compliments on your very nice accent when you speak English. It reminds me of some posh people from the south of England when you talk, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So my name is Timothy Douglas, and I work as officially a lecturer in biochemical engineering, and I do research into biomaterials for tissue regeneration. And I work together with a lot of colleagues, from different countries, and so this is also enabled me to combine my interest in languages, with my interest in science, because science is actually built on collaboration between people. And so anything that's good for human collaboration, like languages, is good for science. And then by doing science with people, you actually use your languages more, and so you become good at language as well. So as we say in English, you can kill two birds with one stone. And what I really like doing is just using languages, but also using languages badly. So I like to say that I like to butcher languages, because if you want, it's like playing a musical instrument. If you want to play a musical instrument well, then you have to play it often and very badly. And the same with languages. If you want to speak a language well, then you have to speak it often and very badly and enjoy the process of doing it. So therefore, I shamelessly butcher languages, and one of my favorite places to butcher them is on Twitter. And Twitter, there's a very nice language learning sort of community there. And I really was very delighted to find them, because I always thought that I was alone with my interest in learning multiple languages. So I didn't really know anybody else who did that. But actually via Twitter and the language community there, we're both members of, Hypea, this hyper polyglot association. Well, actually, I met some of our fellow members there who introduced me there. And then I didn't feel, as we say in Dutch, de vreemde eend in de bijt, the strange duck in the ice hole. But then I realized that we're a lot of strange ducks, but we're just in different ice holes. But organizations like Hypea or communities like Language Twitter allow us, all the strange ducks, to connect together. So regarding the method that I use, I think, well, my whole philosophy is based on 4 points, I would say. Firstly, enjoying using languages badly. So I think there's a slight parallel between certain type using languages and certain types of engineering. You can have better engineering solutions and worse engineering solutions, but the main thing is that it's effective. So if you use a language, if the other person understands what you mean, then it's been a success, in my opinion. So even if you could have expressed yourself more elegantly or more grammatically correctly, okay, that would have been a better solution, but your solution still worked. And again, likewise in engineering, I mean, there are certain engineering situations where there's no room for sloppiness. You have to be exact, but there are many other situations where your engineering solution can be, acceptable, even if it's not ideal. If it does what it's supposed to do, then that's a success. And so I think in the language learning community, there's a lot of talking about learning languages in English, but that's not what I want to do. I want to talk about learning languages badly in lots of languages, and so actually enjoy the process and actually practice what I preach as well. So because if we want people to learn lots of different languages, then we should be doing that ourselves, in my opinion. So yeah, I love butchering languages. And then the second point that I do is I try to use the windows of the dead periods in a day to learn languages. So if I have 5 minutes, when I'm waiting for somebody, or for instance, if I'm doing something where my body is occupied but my mind is free, I can listen to something. And so I just take advantage of these little periods of time during the day. The third thing that I do is I try to integrate languages in my everyday activities. So for instance, I integrate languages into my work so I can kill two birds with one stone. And that's actually the method that scientists use to become good at English, because they may be communicating with people from different countries in English. They may be writing articles in English. They may be reading articles in English. They may be presenting at conferences in English. So I just do what they're doing to learn English, just with other languages. And the fourth point is connected to the first, which is to try to avoid English. Now, I think English as a lingua franca has advantages because we're doing this in English so we can reach a wider audience. So it's good in that sense. But the weakness of English, in my opinion, is that it's not so good for making a connection with people because it's a lingua franca. So I think English has, it can also have a useful function in filling in the gaps. So for instance, to help to facilitate communication, but I prefer to use, other people's languages to communicate with them than using an rather impersonal third language, like English. So, and why Twitter is a good place for learning language and for butchering languages, in my opinion. The idea of, if you want to do something well, you have to practice it often. And social media is designed for frequent use. So it's very easy to use social media frequently. So why not exploit social media to practice languages often? And if you go onto Twitter, it's a bit like you can read tweets in different languages, so you can practice. It's like a sort of this reading method that I think is great, but it's easy to do it often because you're just reading short tweets, just short pieces of information. If you want to practice your writing, again, it's very easy. You just, write something very short. It's much easier to do that consistently than write, long texts. And also the advantage is interactive as well. So you're actually using it to interact with people, which is nice as well. The other nice thing about Twitter, you can use it using your phone, and you have your phone everywhere. And my phone has an autocorrect function. And that's really helpful, I find, if I'm learning a language, which especially if I have because sometimes I don't know what a word is exactly, but I can start to guess. So for instance, if I don't know a word in, let's say, Portuguese, I can try to guess using the word in Italian. And then the word might come up during the autocorrect. And I thought, oh, wow, that's it. So you're sort of learning automatically by writing. And so basically, because of, it's so easy to do consistent, it's so easy to find just a few minutes to tweet or to read tweets, and it's so easy to do it often because it's interactive. That's why I like sort of, doing it so much, and I've been using it over the last few months to start learning, Romanian badly and Catalan badly, and what else have I been butchering? Yeah, I've been butchering, lots of stuff: Croatian, Chinese, Portuguese, and recently Indonesian as well, and Spanish as well. So yes, just butcher on Twitter regularly. I find that fun, and the best method to learn languages is the one you will stick with, and I find it very easy to stick with this. So I just continue doing what I find fun. You can tell I'm a lecturer because I can just talk and talk and talk without stopping.
I know what it is because I'm a teacher myself. So, well, I teach in different places, but I notice I can also talk for very long, and then I notice that my students didn't get the time to get their speaking practice. But anyway, that's another topic. Okay. So how many languages do you think you use on Twitter?
Right. Well, I use all of them. but I use them to sort of to different extents. So there may be a language that I'm more, what's the word, enthusiastic with at one particular time. So at the moment,
my internet got cut. I noticed.
Yes, I noticed you were frozen. Well, I'm glad that my long speech about learning languages did not put you to sleep earlier. So to come back to your point about what languages I'm using on Twitter, the great thing about Twitter is that you can find most languages. Again, I have the feeling in the language learning community that people who speak Western European languages are more well represented than people who speak Eastern, shall we say, European languages. And so when I started to learn Portuguese on Twitter, I got quite a lot of positive reactions. When I started to learn Catalan, I also got a lot of positive reactions as well, which actually shows also the power of the languages that are not so mainstream. So the less mainstream your language is, I think, the more the people appreciate you speaking it, and that's, really what language is all about for me, not just transmitting information. I think that one of in my opinion, the biggest problem in society's perception of languages is as just simply a vehicle for transmitting information and not for connecting with people. That's why you hear people making statements like, what's the point of learning other languages if everybody speaks English? Now, that's not true because only a minority of humanity speaks English. But we're not robots, we're humans. So, it's naive to think that a message in English is going to have the same effect as a message, in another language. So I would say I prefer to use the languages with whom I can connect with people sort of better. But the thing is, I'm too, shall we say, curious to limit myself to a language. I mean, it's a bit like a drug, so like learning new languages. But if I can be cured of my addiction, I don't want the cure because, I enjoy it, so much. So, that's one of the advantages of Twitter. I mean, I was saying that some languages are more popular than others, but I think on Twitter, you will find somebody who you can interact with who does use the language that you want to learn.
And what do you think it's, so you think that the advantage of Twitter is the length of the messages? Because you mentioned that, but so how would Twitter be better than Facebook, for example? Because you can easily find many, many groups on any topic in any given language on Facebook. So why would Twitter be an advantage better than another platform?
Oh, well, I'm not claiming that at all. I'm just talking about the advantages of using some form of social media. So probably the best method of all is to use Twitter and Facebook in conjunction. So you're interacting with more people. But generally, the advantage of social media, I think, is it's easy to do consistently because, it's short and easy to find time for, and it's also interactive. So it's more fun.
So you were kind of talking about social media as a whole, but you focus on Twitter because it is shorter, or because you use it more as, like for your job, or is there a reason why you use that one and not Facebook or something else?
Yes, I mean, the reason I use Twitter, I started to open a Twitter account. It was about 1.5 years ago, but it wasn't for a reason connected with language. So I was actually organizing a scientific conference online, and we decided to have a poster session on Twitter. And then so I opened an account, and then I got the conference participants to tweet about their posters. And then because Twitter is interactive, as you know, you can leave questions, and the people who are presenting can answer. But then one day I remember seeing things connected with language on Twitter, and I just became interested, and I just became following that more and more. And eventually I became aware of this language learning community on Twitter. So now I still use Twitter for scientific purposes now and then to tweet about what's going on in my scientific work. But more, I think the vast majority of what I do is just, interacting with people and, butchering languages, for my own pleasure.
Mm-hmm. So we could easily also use other platforms like Facebook or like WhatsApp or, possibly, I don't know, like Instagram or whatever. Well, I'm not sure that every platform is as suitable as any other, because I do use a bit Instagram for language learning, but I guess that some platforms have other different advantages. So I retain that the big advantage of Twitter is that obligation to keep a certain length. And indeed, if you want to practice a language, whatever the level, you will be more tempted if you have just 5 minutes or 2 minutes to read a tweet than to read a Facebook post that can be much lengthier. Or even if you use WhatsApp, I know that I am in many WhatsApp groups for Esperanto, although I don't really use the groups very often. And some messages are short, others are longer. And when you have a conversation between different people and you haven't looked at the conversation for hours or even days, there are many, many messages, just like we see that in the Hypia WhatsApp group. When you wake up in the morning, the Americans and the South Americans have written like for the whole night, and you have 150 messages to read. So maybe on Twitter, maybe there are less people messaging in the same conversation, and therefore you could have more of a personal written relationship with people, and therefore you can really use these dead times, so these 2 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 15 minutes here, to interact with certain people instead of having to read a whole dialogue.
Yes, I see what you mean. I mean, you again, I don't claim to be an experienced WhatsApp user or an experienced Facebook group user, but generally the tweets, especially if the tweets are not in English, they're unlikely to be hundreds of tweets long. And so, yes, it's quite easy to take in a short period of time. And also, if you have fewer people taking part in the conversation, then you're quite right, it's more personal, and it actually helps you to connect with people, I think, better. You can connect with people better, and that's what language is about, in a little discussion than in a big discussion. So I guess, yes, go ahead.
And how would you compare using Twitter for that purpose as using another language learning app or platform for Tandem, to find Tandem? Like, for example, the app Tandem is pretty useful. Well, I use it. And there, well, you can make messages as long as you want, but mostly you will write short messages. And that is for language learning purely. How would you compare Twitter with Tandem, for example?
Right. Well, I mean, to be honest, I haven't used Tandem, but thank you for the tip. Maybe I'll try it out myself. But I guess one of the nice things I find about Twitter is it isn't just there for language learning. It is there for other things as well. So I can use Twitter, for more than one purpose as well. And sometimes also a very nice thing about Twitter that should not be underestimated. I don't know how it is in other apps, but if you write something in Twitter, you can use the Google Translate function. And that's why one of my strategies is simply to tweet about somebody, spread a bit of positivity about them. And then, even if they don't speak the language that I'm writing in, so if I write in Romanian even, and they don't speak Romanian, they can click on the Google Translate and they can already have an idea about what I'm talking about. So I don't know how that is in Tandem, but I think that's also a useful function in the availability of Google Translate in Twitter, which will allow you to interact with people in other languages, even if they don't speak the language. And most people, in my opinion, in my experience of butchering different languages on Twitter, are quite happy and actually pleased if you write something nice about them, even if it's a language they don't understand, because they can just click on the button, get an idea what you're talking about.
And so another advantage of using Twitter instead of just going on Tandem, for example, is that you have a specific topic. Like, language is used as a means of communication, just like you said. Actually, I wanted to bounce back on different things that you said at the beginning. That language is a communication tool, and that's like the first function of a language. We see language as most people see language as something you study at school, right? When I speak with students, they really see the language only as something that is school related and not something that you can use to communicate with somebody, or that is a carrier of a culture. So actually, when we communicate, and I don't know why, but we've always used Dutch. And you're a native English speaker, right?
Yes, I mean, I grew up monolingual. I think there are some parallels with your story and mine. I grew up monolingual in English, and then I mean, I did learn French and German when I was at school, but when I actually went to Germany for my Erasmus year, as during my studies, that was really what made me really want to learn languages very much, because I wasn't just studying German anymore as an academic subject. I was actually using it to live my life, to connect to people, to have fun, and so on. And that's, if you see, it's when the language really became part of me, if you see what I mean. And and I liked the experience so much that after finishing my studies, I left the United Kingdom to go and live in Germany, and I only quite recently came back to the United Kingdom. But the reason I think why I like speaking Dutch to you is because I think it's something that connects you and me in a way that English would not, because it's something that we both have in common. We both have this interest in the Dutch language, and we both have this common interest in Belgium. So I think it's the best means of communication for the two of us, because it's something that brings the two of us together. And I think, as I said, English is good for filling in the gaps. English is better than nothing. Now, I'm not in any way trying to say that English is less valuable than other languages, or that English or Anglophone cultures are less worthy of learning about. That's not at all. I'm just saying that because people generally learn English, it's not, I would dare say that people generally learn English not because of an enthusiasm for Anglophone cultures. I mean, I know there are some people who love Anglophone cultures and learn English for this reason, but I would claim that many, if not most people, have learned English. It hasn't been completely their choice. It's been chosen for them at school, and sometimes it is something they have learned out of necessity in order to exchange information with other people.
Yeah.
Whereas other languages that we've both learned because we have a genuine interest, in the language and the culture, that's something that we're both generally passionate about, and therefore, if we have a joint passion, that helps us to connect us better than something that people have learned, partially out of obligation.
Indeed, yeah. English is often, used and studied because of the lingua franca status that it has. Actually, English is my favorite language of all the languages I have. Even French being my native one, I prefer using English. But with certain people, you will use other languages. Like with certain polyglots, I have kind of, either we met through a language or we have a certain connection because of culture or because of language preference. So I've noticed that some of the polyglots will use different language according to the context or according to the people they talk with. And with you, it's always been in Dutch since I met you, actually. So we've never used English, and so even when we exchange messages or we start talking, it will be in Dutch, because it's like a default language between the two of us. Although English is your native one and it's my favorite language, and we still use Dutch, which is, well, I just find it funny. But I also have this kind of thing with other polyglots. With certain people, I would automatically switch to Catalan. With others, I would automatically use Spanish or Italian or Portuguese or whatever. So yeah, it's a polyglot thing. well, that others are really imagine or can't imagine.
Well, you bring up a very interesting point. Multilingualism, both polyglotism and multilingualism, are often very context specific, and people sort of you were talking about using different languages in different situations. Now, it's not uncommon for people to talk about different things with different people and then have different competencies in different areas. So, for instance, I speak Polish, and I can give you a lecture about my area, biomaterials, in Polish without any problems. However, if you were to ask me to describe what you're wearing, then I would find it difficult because I'm not used to talking about clothes in Polish ever. So yeah, what do you mention about having preferences for people? I can sympathize with that as well. And also having preferences for talking about certain topics in certain languages is often very common. I mean, I do know people who prefer to talk about scientific topics in English because they're just very used to the vocabulary and the expressions that they would use to describe these certain scientific concepts. Yeah. But I think with polyglots in general, I prefer to speak as many different languages as possible with them, because that's what we all love doing.
Yeah. One question I had to bounce back on the Twitter methodology. So if I get it well, you basically use 2 of the 4 skills: the reading one and the writing one. What about speaking and listening?
Right, very good point. Well, I think that tweeting comes between writing and speaking. So because you're writing short messages, it tends to be more spontaneous than writing in the sense of a long email or a formal email. But at the same time, it's less spontaneous than speaking. So you do have a bit more time to formulate what you're going to say. So it's true that you don't pronounce the words that are appearing on the tweet. That's certainly true. But I think that chatting or tweeting has a useful role to play as a bridge between writing longer texts, and speaking, because it gets you used to using the language in a more spontaneous fashion. And regarding listening, again, you have a very good point. You don't practice, tweeting, via listening. So maybe it's not the best for that. How exactly you would, incorporate, listening practice inside social media, I don't know how to do that yet. But I think, in fact, I think that this short texting, it may be deserving of a class all of its own. Like, so instead of having writing, you could just have another sort of skill, which is like short writing or texting. And I think to do that well requires slightly different competencies than writing long messages.
What is the limit of length of a Twitter? I never use Twitter, so
I must confess I don't know exactly, but what I do know is that it's nice to write in Chinese on Twitter, because each character is only the equivalent of 2 letters. And and that actually, Lindy Bottas, who works as the amazing polyglot, who works as a designer as well. She gave a talk at a conference I organized recently on languages and science, and she was saying that when you're a designer, you have to think about how much space a word is going to take up in different languages. So something that might take up very little space in Chinese or in Korean might take up a lot of space in Italian or in Hungarian, for instance. So if you like writing longer messages, I think Chinese is good, because then you can fit in more characters. Also, Chinese is really nice to write if you have a smartphone, because you learn Chinese as well, don't you?
Yeah.
And I love that pinyin in Mandarin. So if you can have your keyboard such that you write in the pinyin and you some different characters come up, then you can choose between the characters, and that's much quicker than trying to find them in a paper dictionary. So it actually I've become better at Chinese thanks to my smartphone. Because I practice more often, because I can find the characters that I want to use much more quickly using this. And also, thanks to Google Translate, I can actually if somebody writes a message in Chinese, I can put into Google Translate. Now, even if the translation into English is not perfect, at least Google Translate can tell me what the pinyin is. So I don't have to go and try to look up these characters in a dictionary, which would take much longer. So it makes me much more likely to write the language often and also to read the language often. And so it's really, I think, probably more than any other language, it's really improved my consistency in using it, Chinese. So I think I think you asked me, I can't tell you which one I've been using the most on Twitter, but I think that my Chinese has been helped the most thanks to the extra functionalities which are so accessible on the smartphone. So the possibility of choosing a character if you know the pinyin, and also because thanks to Google Translate, finding the pinyin which corresponds to characters.
It's crazy the help that we get from technology, because I think every polyglot could agree that without all these Facebook, internet, Twitter, smartphones, Netflix, we would not have gotten that far in the past few years. I don't even get how polyglots could learn before the internet, like even when Richard Sim got started, or even Luca Lampariello has been learning language for 30 years, and you could count Steve Kaufman as well. I really wonder how they did. I guess I would not have learned all these languages if there had been no internet. I would have learned them, but much slower, because I started about 12 years ago. And actually, I found recently something that I used when I started learning English 12 years ago, and that's antique.
Look wow! What?
That's an electronic translator that I found on the internet, and you have about 10 languages or something. The battery is dead, so I can't show. But I would type in every letter, and it takes time to type, because when you click, it takes time to get in. And you could, it's really slow, but that's like the ancestor of Google Translate, although you can only write per word, and you have even a kind of a booklet with the basic words to get around. So yeah, it's really funny because
yes, and you have it in Cyrillic as well. You have a Cyrillic keyboard.
Yeah, I didn't use it with Cyrillic back then because I was only into English, but I found it back recently, and I thought that's how I started learning languages more than 10 years ago, and I like, it might not be usable anymore, but I think I will never throw it away because that's how it all started. It's funny to have such an ancient object.
Oh right, yes, and so it tells part of your story, how your language learning journey started.
Yeah, I really use it a lot, and of course nowadays using DeepL, Google Translate, Lingui, and so on are way faster. But that back then was like my Christmas gift. It was like my whole world. It was yeah.
Yes, and I remember being sometimes very excited when I was young to be able to find just certain books in certain languages, and let alone your audio materials. So I remember when I was starting to learn languages as a teenager, you would sometimes, if you were lucky, you would get cassettes. And then if you were very lucky, you might get a video, and so, but I think if we had been learning languages back then, we would have become better at reading, and we might have become better at writing, because those were the main things that people could do well with the resources that were available at the time.
Yeah.
So I think that's also why a lot of older people, they may be able to write well and read well, but they have more trouble with more spontaneous activities such as speaking or listening, just because they're not used to it. Mm-hmm. Yes, but now it's actually amazing. You can learn, I think, almost any languages that you want to. I mean, I've just started to learn Ukrainian, but although Ukrainian isn't the most popular language, you still can find enough resources to learn independently as well.
Yeah, you did not have that back then. Today, it's like you put yourself on any language, well, not any language, or like 7,000 languages without counting dialects. But yeah, you find so much material when you know where to look. That's where on my website, Le Caméléon des Langues, I put like a part of the website with all the resources I could find for the languages I was learning. So I have like 15, 16 languages with between 30 and 100 resources because of all the resources you can find. And actually, some resources have more than 50 languages available with the basics, so it's crazy. Two things I wanted to still discuss, at least two things, regarding, we were talking about the 4 skills. So I believe that with Twitter, you can, it's a nice way to work on reading and writing when you don't have much time or you want to connect with certain people. And as I said, you're lacking 2 other skills. I don't believe that one resource should itself be enough for all language skills. Just like when you go to the gym, you will not just use one machine for every muscle. So I think that you can use YouTube or Tandem or Netflix, or there are like so many others for listening and speaking. So I think that Twitter, just like Facebook or just like whatever else, you can use them for writing and reading, and it can give you a lot of advantages. But then you should not only use one resource for language learning. You can also, like when I work on my languages, if I want to practice reading and writing, I have books. If I want to practice listening and speaking, I have Tandem and I have podcasts. So every day I try to listen to some of my languages as with podcast. Then once in a while I have a Tandem. So I talk with a native speaker or I talk with myself, like I think aloud. And then when I want to read, I just open a book or I read something on the internet. So when I was asking about the other skills, it was just, asking if there is another way using Twitter. But of course, it's not a necessity to stick to only Twitter. You can learn language with different materials at the same time, of course.
Yes, I mean, I think it comes down to the fact that the best method for you is probably the method that you will stick with.
Yeah,
and I find it very easy to stick with Twitter. But of course, it's, to use your analogy, it's only part of my fitness regime. So I also use YouTube a lot. It's something that I can listen to quite easily, when I'm doing something else, or sometimes, especially when I'm a beginner, I find it very useful to be able to read and listen at the same time, so I can tell the words apart when somebody is talking. Yeah, and so often, actually, I use YouTube very often when I'm washing the dishes. I'm very primitive and don't have a dishwasher. But thanks to the fact that I don't have a dishwasher, I watch YouTube videos more often, and I can read as well and listen at the same time. So I'm just doing something, cleaning something mindlessly with my hands, and then I can look at the screen and listen at the same time, and so I can expand my vocabulary. So again, it's sort of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. I also, it's important, I think, you're coming back to speaking. I also use, iTalk. I'm a big fan of that. And so when I feel that I can build more or less a sentence in a language, I like to, have confidence that somebody is going to understand what's coming out of my mouth. I think that's very important. So I also then use, italki as well. And what's actually good about italki, I'm not saying italki is better than other platforms. It's just the one I'm most familiar with. But you can find more or less any language there.
Yeah, it has a database of like crazy. I don't use it. I've already been tempted, but I simply prefer to exchange languages using tandems, because I just think it's well, first it's for free. If you have a tandem, you don't pay. You give your time and your language and you get the other one in exchange, and that's it. So I prefer that idea of exchange than paying for classes, although I'm a language teacher, right? Something else I had in mind. Yeah, regarding, to bounce back on the idea of the 4 skills, at the moment, my target language, I have several, of course, but my main language is German. And so for reading, I'm reading Harry Potter. For writing, I'm also working on it. I am using Luca Lampariello's bi-directional translation method. And it's actually, I've rediscovered it recently, and it's working pretty well. So with that, I am improving my writing. For listening, I listen to podcasts in German on a daily basis while doing the dishes, sporting, going to work, and so on. And for talking, once a week, I have a tandem German-English with a native German speaker. So on a weekly basis, I have my 4 skills. And with writing, with the book, I get my grammar and my vocab. So You don't have to stick to one method, just use a diversity of things. And just as you say, as long as you stick to it. So you need to like what you do. And so you mentioned at the very start, like butchering the language by just using the language as much as possible. Even if you make plenty of mistakes, who cares? That's part of the learning process. And I think that's a very important message for anybody, especially those who say, well, I don't feel good with the language. I don't speak it well. I prefer to just not talk or something. Well, it can be your choice totally. But as long as you keep on having a contact with the language and doing something you enjoy that will give you motivation, you will eventually improve. I don't like to force students to talk because some of them genuinely don't like to talk.
Yeah.
I don't want to force it. But I would say stick to something you enjoy. And as long as you enjoy it, you will be learning something.
Sure.
Make sure that you, if you like writing or talking and you're afraid of making mistakes, but you still, you enjoy talking, then speak. Who cares about mistakes? Even natives make mistakes.
Yeah, you bring back up a very important point. During this pandemic, I'm a university lecturer, and we had to record a lot of lectures, for our students. And when I would listen to them, I would notice how many mistakes I was making in English, which is my first language, when I was speaking. And so I thought, well, I don't speak perfect English, so why should I care about speaking perfect German or Dutch or whatever? I also like very much the philosophy of this Benny Lewis, who says, I'm going to try to make 200 mistakes every day.
Amazing.
Because if you're making mistakes, then you're obviously doing a lot of things right as well at the same time. I mean, I agree with you that maybe this approach won't suit everybody. So, for instance, I know that some people are ashamed a bit of speaking. I mean, I've become shameless, so I don't care. But I don't know if wouldn't suggest that this approach will suit everybody. I completely agree with you that we should do something that we like doing often. It's just also important to be aware of what you are likely to achieve with your method. So, for instance, if you're reading all the time and you love that, keep on doing that, but just be aware that you'll become good at reading. You might become better at writing as well, and better at grammar and so on, but you may not necessarily become as good at speaking as you'd like to. Mm-hmm. And the same that goes for speaking. If you speak a lot, great, keep doing that, but you may not necessarily become as good at grammar and as good at reading or understanding things as you would like to.
I think you should really focus on doing different activities for different skills, because every time that you approach a word or a grammatical structure from another angle, you will learn it better. So it's just like, again, when you go to the gym, I just like this kind of image, because I really see like the links with language learning. You have to practice most types of muscles. You will not just do abs and biceps and pecs and so on. You also have to use your knees, to use all types of muscles in order to have a good general shape. With language learning, it's the same thing. You need to work on the different skills, on vocab, on grammar, on sounds, so that you approach every aspect of language on different angles. And the more you work on them on different angles, the better your brain will learn it. Yeah. So if you work on a word by listening to it, by reading it, by looking for translations, by looking for conjugations and so on, you really work on the language from all possible ways, you will learn it better. And that's what I'm doing with the bidirectional translation method. When I want to translate something, I look at the word and then I'm like, okay, which case is it? Which declination? From which verb does it come? What is infinitive? Are there other irregular forms for this word? Where does it come in the sentence? And actually, you work on a very short piece of text, but you work on it from so many different angles that in the end, that word will be in your long-term memory without even memorizing it. And that's what I'm noticing. There are words I've learned and I know how to use them, but I haven't really studied it. I just know that I had to look for information. I had to write it, rewrite it, because of the method. I didn't study it, but just because of the different angles and the number of ways I've been in contact with the language, it's just there.
Right. Actually, you bring up two interesting points. I don't know Luca Lamparello's bidirectional method myself. I haven't tried it. But I think it's also important to be open to sort of new ideas of learning,
Yeah.
even if you have something that works for you. So there's a saying that good is the enemy of better. So to give you an example from my own experience, my method of learning was mainly based on reading and writing. But I realized, when I started to try to expand my portfolio of languages about a year and a half ago, I realized that this method was probably not going to be compatible with my current lifestyle. So I tried out some methods. Maybe the method of Italiano Automatico to learn and then to try to listen to learn mainly by listening. And I found that was much more effective and much more compatible with my lifestyle, so I was able to make progress. If I may use your gym analogy and take it further, I think the way in which you approach language will also depend on what you hope to achieve with it. Now, I completely agree that one should approach language from different angles, and also one should be aware to try to train a bit of everything. But it depends. If you're a bodybuilder, of course, then you'll want to look good, so you'll have to train everything, shall we say, almost equally. But if you maybe go to the gym because you're a sportsman, if you're a rower, for instance, then of course certain muscles are going to be more important, than others. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that you should make sure that the way in which you're learning language is compatible with what you want to achieve with the language. So to give an example, if you want to speak a lot with people, then your language learning should have a very high component of speaking and listening in it. If you want to be a polymath who only reads, then of course you shouldn't be speaking. You should be, doing a lot of reading and writing.
Yeah, just like when you are a translator, you need to have an excellent knowledge of written language. You don't really need to talk a lot. And I noticed that when I was studying, because I am a Germanist at first, so I studied Germanic languages, so literature, linguistics, culture, and so on. And we had to take classes in a high school of translation. So we had classes with people studying to become translators. And by talking with them and by seeing how they reacted in class, we've noticed one big thing, one main stuff. What we noticed that we were better at speaking, they were better at writing, and their vocab was way wider than ours, whatever the language, because we were studying English and Dutch. So from the start, they had to swallow such huge amounts of vocab lists. And I was very impressed by the words that they knew. But when it came to speaking, our pronunciation, our fluency, everything was way better than how they spoke. And I was like, how can we be in the same class? Our level is way higher than theirs. It's because their studies don't focus on the same thing. And if I had to translate what they have to translate, I would have felt completely drowned. I would have had to spend hours looking for words and understanding the differences between certain words, to just focus on different things, because these are not the same skills. I studied to become a language teacher, and I can do the things related to it, but I cannot translate as well as they do, because we simply haven't studied, we haven't focused on the same stuff. So for every job, you will focus on other things.
Yes, I mean, one thing I've become very aware of lately is that language learners are an extremely diverse community, and they also combine their languages, with very, very different things. I think that's also something that I hope can change in society, that people sometimes think of languages, coming back to what you were saying at the start, as being academic subjects rather than things that enhance, other aspects of our life, such as, to use an English expression, they can be the icing on the cake. And I know that's a very Anglophone expression, because it's usually the English-speaking countries that have icing on cake. But I suppose that's a topic for another discussion, which could last another hour.
Yeah, easily. One last thing I wanted to underline was when you said speak often and bad. That is so important, because I'm also a fan of Benny Lewis's method of he said once that he wasn't happy if he hadn't made at least 100 mistakes, because it's not just the fact of making mistakes that's useful. in order to make mistakes, you need to use the language, whatever you do with it. And the more you use it, the more you get familiar with it, even if you learn mistakes, because actually I learned to speak English on my own by thinking in English aloud while biking home from school, half an hour every day. And my English just exploded. It skyrocketed in just a few months. So the more you use the language, even if you're just on your own, whether you speak on your own, whether you speak with somebody else, whether you read, whether you write, whatever you do, the more you practice it, the more your brain will get accustomed to it. And after that, if you make mistakes, who will care? We almost never see people who say, "Huh, you made that mistake. Huh, you're bad at making." Whenever my students make mistakes, I tell them, I want to thank you for making that mistake, because thanks to you, everybody will learn and everybody will have a higher level after the class. And I've never had any negative response. And whenever I teach, when I say, is there anybody who would prefer to not receive feedback? Nobody raises their hand, no one. Everybody loves feedback. And people, they feel sorry when they make a mistake. They're like, oh, I'm sorry for that mistake. And I tell them, don't be, you're learning, you're here for that. And I'm paid for that. So everybody's winning. So,
yes, yeah. And actually, we shouldn't be concentrating on the mistake that was made, but all the things in the sentence that they got right as well. So if, as we were saying before, if the message was understandable, then it's been a success.
Yeah, that's the main part. So yeah, as I said, language is a communication tool. And the main goal is just to communicate, even if you make plenty of mistakes. And I remember when you started writing was it in Catalan? Well, thanks to your Spanish, your level was already pretty good.
Oh, well, actually, no. I didn't speak Spanish.
Oh, you spoke another language.
Well, I speak Italian. I just spoke. I started speaking Spanish recently. It's actually because of my students. So I'm doing an experiment with some of my students, and I said to them, we're at a university. We're meant to be a global university. And where we have people from all over the world, but people aren't asking the students what languages they speak or what they'd like to speak. So please tell me what languages you speak. And then they sent me a list. And then I said, okay, here are some of the languages that you speak that I don't. Please choose one for me. And then we had languages such as Hausa and Arabic and Hindi and Spanish and Welsh, because we were in the United Kingdom. And so they chose the one that was most popular was Spanish. So I said, okay, I'll learn Spanish for you. And yeah, I kept my word. So that's why I just recently started to learn Spanish. And it's actually quite an interesting experience because I've butchered some other Romance languages before. It was actually quite relatively easy to make progress in it. So now after I've been learning it for 5 weeks, but I can already have a conversation in it. But that's not because I'm particularly smart. No, it's because of the magic of learning languages that are similar. Once you have learnt, one language of a family, it's much easier to learn another language of the same family as well. So learning Spanish, in some ways, it's been there are two sides to it. It's in one way, I'm very glad that I can make progress quickly. That's rather exhilarating. At the same time, it's a slight disappointment because I think I'm probably not getting as much out of learning the language for myself as I would, for instance, if I had learned Hindi or Hausa or Arabic. Because I think if you were learning a more difficult language, so I find with Chinese, for instance, I'm very glad that I've learned Chinese, although I speak it badly, because just by the fact that it's unusual from European languages, it's a different way of, looking at language. And I found that very, enriching myself.
It's crazy, the diversity of languages that you're into. Actually, I think you are on more languages than I am. But
yes. But I would make one point. I think it's not important how many languages. I think the best person. I think some people say who's the best polyglot or who's the best at learning languages. But I think the person who's the best at languages is actually the person who's using languages to enhance his or her life in the best possible way for him. So whether that person be learning 100 languages or one language badly or excellently, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Is it making your life and the life of other people better. So if you are doing that, then in my eyes, you are you're a great language learner, regardless of the number or the level.
And it's not a competition. Like, there are some polyglots who speak 3 times the number of languages that I speak, but I just look up to them, like, not with a feeling of jealousy, but rather of, I just take them as mentors, and I just listen to their experience, and I just take it as inspiration in order to go forward. And so what I love with this new series I'm making is there are so many different ways for language learning, especially now with all the possibilities we have with the internet. And everybody will have come up with some method, because people like us, we really are driven by such a passion, such an obsession, and we will find ways that stick to our way of learning, because we will have tried to optimize the learning process. And so we will go further and faster with our method. So by learning how others do it, we actually, it gives a possibility to discover new horizons and to learn faster.
Yes, actually, one good thing about the series that you're doing, I think that a lot of people's impressions of language learning are formed by experiences at school, and in group teaching. And group teaching has many advantages, of course, and respect to the teachers who do that. But, that's only, that's for teaching in a group. And many people learn individually, and actually a lot of the work in language learning, even if you're learning in a group, is done outside the classroom. So and you don't hear so much about people's methods, how to learn better. And so I think by people sharing their stories, and then you can listen to the stories and think, oh, I could take bits of this story perhaps and apply them to myself, or just try them out. I think that's very valuable. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that about you polyglots who can speak 3 many times as languages as we can. Recently, that's what inspired me, was actually people like Luca Lampariello. When I saw him speaking 14 languages excellently, I had a limiting belief at the time. There were 4 languages that I used regularly, and that were German, Dutch, Russian, and Polish. And I thought to myself, well, I should just be content with using these 4, because probably I'm not going to manage to learn any more. But then I thought to myself, well, if Luca can learn 14, then maybe I can manage 7. And so I started thought, and so that was what inspired me to try to learn more languages. And so now, and I had this. I think I'm not alone in this. I had this limiting belief of the number of languages I can learn, but I'm glad actually for people who do not limit themselves and serve as an example to people like us who show, we can do more,
But we all have limiting beliefs on certain things, and on language learning, I also had some, because I was actually born as a polyglot, and polyglot means it's the opposite of a polyglot. It's someone who is not good at languages. That's what I thought as well at first. And I remember when I started getting into languages, so I started with mastering, learning English, then adding Dutch, and at some point I was with Spanish, and I could speak the 4. And I remember having fun with thinking, in my thoughts, going back from the one to the other. So speaking one, then the other, then the third, and the fourth, and the first, and then the second. And I thought, wow, it's already amazing. And I thought, you cannot learn 5, 6, 7, 8 languages. And at some point I met someone who said, well, I know somebody who can speak 6 languages. And I thought, wow, 6. And I thought I would never be able to do that, because I spoke 4, and I thought, even just learning English was awesome. And then I met other people who could speak 7, 8, 9, 10, and I thought, whoa, how did you do that? It's like I can never get there. And today I can use 10 at very different levels. And my Norwegian, my last one, is still a bit weak. And I still have now contact with people who speak 15 or 20, and I still don't see myself as speaking 20 or even 15 languages. But I know these are only limiting beliefs. And I think that some polyglots like Richard Simcott and Alexander Agwals also said that we have limiting beliefs. And if you read the book Babel No More, there was a quote saying, there is no cognitive or scientific evidence that you have a limited number of languages you can learn. You can get to 10 without any issue. You just have to put in the effort and the work. But there is no limitation as to how many you can learn. The only limitation is time. But your brain can learn as many as you want. And with time and with our experience and practice and inspiring each other, we all get better. We all get to more languages. When I entered IP, I had 8. Now I have 10. And I know it will take time for the next ones because Chinese will take years. But I know that when I go to Danish or to Swedish or to Afrikaans or to Romanian, I know that I will be adding faster. So the only limiting beliefs are what we impose to ourselves. And with the inspiration we get from other polyglots, these limiting beliefs either disappear or they have less of an impact. And that's extremely interesting. That's so useful.
Yes, indeed. And one thing that also inspires me, I mean, is I only heard about Moses McCormick after the sad news of his, premature death. But then when I started to watch his videos, I was just so impressed at how he could, just touch people. Even he was never afraid to speak a language and speak a language often quite imperfectly, because he knew that people would appreciate his making the effort to speak. And so if anybody says to you, what's the point of learning other languages if everybody speaks English, just get them to watch some of his videos and see the smile on these people's faces when he speaks their language. And that's the perfect answer.
He's been one of the most influential polyglots on earth, or actually of the 21st century. I've never met him, and I wish I could have met him because I've heard he was such a fantastic person, not just language learner, but person, a human. And indeed, when you watch his videos, so on his on YouTube, it's Laoshu, like 55,500 something.
Exactly.
And when you watch it, it's just insane, the number of languages that he could use at different levels, and the motivation that he could give to other people. He could kindle anybody's motivation. And these are amazing polyglots, because language learning is quite tough when you think of the brain power it takes, the motivation it takes, because you get doubts. But when you get these videos, and that's why we're trying to do, you and I now, inspiring people, because we get inspired by others as well. It's just insane, the motivation that he gave. And there are some videos that I watch simply because I know that sometimes I feel a bit down with language learning, and I'm like, which video could rekindle my motivation? And I watch these videos, and after that, I'm all pumped up, and I'm like, okay, let's get into language learning. So
yes.
Yeah, it's amazing, this community we have.
Yes, I would also, what I've also found myself very useful in his videos, he was very insightful in seeing that he said, if I have a conversation with a native speaker, I already know what they're going to ask me. And so this conversation and small talk can go on for half an hour. So he really knew, and because he was able to anticipate the questions they were going to ask, he was always ready, to have some small talk with them and interact with them. But if you listen, I also find them very useful if I'm learning another language, is actually to find a Laoshu 55,000 video where he's speaking that language. It's good listening practice as well. So So since I started to learn Indonesian recently, I've started to looked at some Laoshu's Indonesian videos, and then I think, wow, yes, I can recognize a few words there, and I think that's something I could apply in myself in my small talk with people from Indonesia.
Yeah, it's a very good method that he uses of anticipating, because indeed we often answer the same stuff, and actually when you go to a language exchange, you notice that you will always ask and answer exactly the same questions. So when you have a basic level language exchanges, in the city are very good because you will always use the same questions and you will keep on repeating what you've already said, but then you solidify your knowledge. If you want to go to the higher level, to the next level, then the best is to create a connection with somebody with whom you will talk every week, because you will get to know their life and you will get to ask more personal, private questions, or you will go further into discussions. And instead of saying, what do you do in your life? You will rather say, how is your daughter? She had an operation the other day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you will get to a very more specific vocab level. And I've noticed that with my German tandem, because we meet every week and we've done that for 2 to 3 months. And my German is about A1. I'm not at an extraordinary level. And now when we talk, it's on different topics. And she keeps on asking me questions. And I always need to get out of my comfort zone using tenses I don't master and ask me for words that I've never seen in German. And I will maybe not memorize them at once, but at least I get to hear it and I get to try to understand what she says. So, well, that's a whole other topic, but that's yeah, I don't know why I mentioned it.
Yes, but actually that is an important thing that you mentioned. At any level, as we're saying, good is the enemy of better. So it's quite easy to remain in your comfort zone, not just as at a beginner or at an intermediate, but even higher than that. And so if you want to become better at a language, you always need to keep pushing yourself. So, for instance, when I lived, I lived for many years in Germany and also in the Netherlands and the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. Now, there would always come a time in all these where I felt comfortable enough in the language that I stopped learning it actively. And I would start to become distracted, by other languages, which I didn't know so well. But so I think to myself sometimes, maybe I should have pushed myself a bit further and just, in these languages. I mean, I thought, okay, I know German, I know Dutch, well enough for my everyday life, so I can do my whole life in Dutch. That's not a problem. But still, that doesn't mean that I could not have done it better. So I think it's important, regardless of your level, to keep on looking for these experiences that are a bit different, that force you to use the language differently.
Yeah. So it all depends on the level you have and the level you want to get to. So
I suppose so, yes.
If you think that you have an A2 in a language and you just wanted to discover it and you're good with that, you don't need to go higher. Just look at what you want to do with the language. There are languages with which we will want to go to C1, C2, and others for which A1 or A2 will be enough. So we all have different languages at different level because some of them are more priority than others. For example, in my case, speaking good Spanish is way more important than speaking good Norwegian because I come across way more Spanish speakers in my life and I like the language way more. One question that came back to my mind regarding your method, although we'll have to wrap it up because it's getting really lengthy. Can you use Twitter and your method for any level, or is it more suited to one level than the other? So I guess it's better for A2, B1, B2. I guess when you are A1, it's maybe a bit complicated, or do you find ways to still be able to use the method whatever the level, even when you're really a beginner?
Well, when I'm a beginner, I just write something and then I just hope. I will use things like dictionaries, or I will use Google Translate as well to help me, but I'll only use it if I understand what Google Translate is telling me. So I'll rather write something knowingly with mistakes that I can understand than write something from Google Translate that I don't understand, because that defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
So I use it from the very beginning, and I just write something. And if for instance, if it's a language that's quite similar to languages I already know, that's not so difficult. But again, if it's a language that's more dissimilar, such as I tweet now in Indonesian, which is more challenging. But I think because the fact that you're actively writing means you have to think about the language, and sometimes it means you have to look up words in a dictionary, so that expands your vocabulary. So at the beginning, certainly yes, it's effective. I don't see why it couldn't be effective at the whole spectrum. So even if you're, trying to tweet in your native language, you have, which you know very well, you still have to try to tweet in a way that is as concise and elegant as possible. So you're still working on your tweet. It's just that you're trying to achieve a higher level, as it were. So I believe that regardless of your level, whether you're at a beginner or it's your native language, tweeting, any practice that you have is valuable. The question is, what is it? Is it more valuable as a beginner or more valuable as as an advanced learner? Well, mainly when I've been tweeting as a beginner or an intermediate learner, so I can't really judge that. But I guess if you can find the right community to interact with in your target language, you should get. I think you should get a benefit out of it, regardless of what level you're writing at.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I guess I will try to find back my info details for Twitter and get back on it and see if I can find some Norwegian things or Chinese stuff to read and to write in. I think we can wrap it up here. This has been a very lengthy conversation, but so worth it, so interesting. And I will simply put I will rewatch the video to indicate when we discussed what, because we had so many interesting things and it took a long time. So I think people would prefer to look directly at where they want to go.
I see. But anyway, thank you very much for the discussion. I have the feeling that we could go on talking for another hour without any problem. So
I will just stop the recording, and so we could possibly go on further. So for our listeners, if you've come to the end, thank you very much for sticking with us.
Yes, because language learning is a marathon. So if you were able to stick to the end of our conversation, you have a lot of stamina. You have the dedication required for language learning.
That is a very true thing indeed. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so I will meet the audience in another video with yet another method. So thank you very much, Tim, for all your knowledge and your wisdom.
Okay, thank you for yours.
Yep.